So I'm going to try to backtrack a little bit so that we kind of remember where we're holding. We spent a lot of time in chapter 4 discussing the benefit of action over inspiration. Hi, Raina. We said the main thing is just get it done. It's not about, just how much I love you and how much I feel for you. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to do something in the relationship, then what's the relationship worth? And for someone who says, I love God, I have a relationship with God in my heart, but I can't deal with doing the details of what he wants, so chapter 4 really elaborated on why action is the main thing and action is really important. One of the things that we mentioned about action is that it allows us to transcend ourselves and connect with God on his terms, like to give him a hug, to wear his garments. We said that action is the garments that we wear. We also discussed that it's not necessarily hypocritical for someone to say, I'm going to do these mitzvahs, these things that God wants me to do, even if I don't always do them. It's not any more hypocritical than saying, I'm going to go to the gym today, even though I didn't go to the gym yesterday, and even though I might not go to the gym tomorrow. Every time we engage in a mitzvah, we're transcending ourselves and we're connecting to something higher. We're engaging in the relationship. We're doing what our beloved wants us to do. Now, that was chapter 4. Chapter 5 takes a whole different angle, which we started dabbling in last class. Chapter 5 talks about feeding our soul. We all have times when our soul feels flat. We're lacking inspiration. We can't get into the Jewish thing. We can't get ourselves inspired again. Maybe we came out of high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, things felt great, things felt high, but I don't know, I wake up on a Monday morning and I'm just not feeling it. The Tanya describes this as a soul that's dehydrated, it's starved, it's lacking inspiration. What am I supposed to do? How do you feed a starving soul? What are your thoughts? What do you do to get yourself inspired Jewishly if you're just not feeling it? No ideas?
Pray.
Inspiring ladies. What?
Pray.
Who said pray?
Lorraine.
Oh, you just came in. Oh, hi, Lorraine.
Yes, I'm just walking in my house. Sorry. Yeah.
Study to music.
That's okay. I didn't see your name, so I was like, hey, I hear her voice. I don't see her. Okay, she says pray for inspiration.
Study Torah.
Study Torah. In the Tanya's language, the Tanya says that the food for the soul, the ultimate inspiration, is knowledge, which is Torah study. But before we get into the how and why of that, how that works, let's talk about for a second. We just said that the main thing is action, right? The main thing is do the right thing. So do we even need to be inspired? Like, what's the point of investing in inspiring ourselves if the main thing is to get it done? Like, we're taking a totally different angle, where the last chapter we kept saying, forget the inspiration, do what you need to do. Now we're saying, wait 1 second, you have to work on your inspiration. So how does that work? Yeah, go ahead, Arlene.
Maybe without inspiration, you'd be less apt to continue doing it.
That's right. Right. How like you start off doing something and you could only keep it going so long if you're not inspired to do it. Mm-hmm. So a great example I heard for this, kind of still going off that comparison to a human relationship, right? So let's say we have a husband and wife, they come to therapy, they're having trouble. She has a bunch of things she wants him to do, and he just doesn't get it. It doesn't make any sense to him. So he says, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. You want at least explain what it is that you want. I don't understand. Why do you need to go to this restaurant and not that one? And why do you care so much if it's this fabric and not that one, or if we did it on this day and not on the other day, or whatever it is, she has her ideas of what it is that she wants. He can't get into her mind. He can't understand them. And he says, I don't know. I can't do all these ridiculous things. They don't make any sense to me. And what does the therapist say? Well, for starters, just do it.
Anyway,
if you care about your partner, do the things that are important to them. that's kind of what we mentioned last time. Like, God tells us to do a bunch of things that may or may not make sense to us, but we're in this relationship. Do what it is that our beloved wants. So then this husband starts doing all the things his wife says. He's like, fine, I'm not going to try to understand. You want to go out on this date to this restaurant. You want to book this kind of vacation and not that one. You care about this painting and not that one. I'm not even going to ask you. I'm just going to do whatever it is that you tell me to do. It works well for a bit. And at some point, he hasn't been asking at all. And at some point, she says to him, wait a second, you're not going to ask me why I chose that painting over the other? He's like, no, I don't ask. I know I'm only supposed to do what you want. I'm not supposed to ask. And it bothers her at some stage. Like, wait, don't you care to understand why I really like this as opposed to that? Meaning, yes, get the job done, but is it really an intimate relationship if they're not connecting on a deeper level? So that idea of trying to understand my partner is not conditional to me doing what it is that they want, but it does make our relationship a deeper and an intimate one. If we're just doing things for each other and not trying to understand each other, that's a very dry relationship. We're getting it done, which I guess action is the main thing, but it's a flat relationship. So now they're never going to fully understand each other. And the understanding each other is not conditional to doing for each other. But at the same time as I'm doing for my partner, I'm also trying to understand them. So explain to me again, why is it that you like that more than that? Or what? Tell me why this was so important to you. I really want to try to understand. Maybe I won't fully get it, but let me try to understand. So I'm adding another dimension to the relationship, which is deeper. It's a more intimate connection. It's not just doing for each other. So if we're going to go back to the Tanya, in our relationship with God, yes, there is priority to action. I can't sit around and say, well, I can't do any of the action until I understand all the reasons for. So priority is, God said to do X, I'm going to do X because I'm in this relationship, I'm in it on his terms, and I'm going to do things even if I don't understand them. At the same time, I don't want this relationship to just be action-based. So I want to invest in having a real, deep, meaningful relationship. And so I want to try to get him. I want to try to understand him. And how do I get that understanding and that deeper connection? That comes through trying to understand how he thinks and why he wants what he wants and why he cares about what he cares about. So what the Tanya is starting to tell us in chapter 5 is, let's talk about this part of the relationship. How are you going to really get God's thoughts? How are you going to really connect to him on that deeper, more intimate level? That can't be accomplished through deeds alone. That has to be through study. And that's kind of where chapter 5 really begins. Now, it's interesting, the term that the Tanya uses, it's used in Hebrew, it's used in English. I know it's used in Yiddish. I am curious, those who speak other languages, how many other languages this applies in. When we speak about understanding an intellectual concept, we often use the term to grasp. Like someone says, I get it, or I got it, right? In Hebrew, it's litfos, like I caught it. In Yiddish, for those who speak Yiddish, there's a word chap. Chap means to catch. Now, you say chap for catching a ball. You also say chap like you chap, like you get it, like your mind gets it. I don't know if anyone here speaks other languages that they can suggest in, but we refer to grasping an intellectual concept the same way as we like pick up a physical item, like I get it. And the Tanya is going to elaborate on what is this idea of getting something and why that can create such a deep bond when we're trying to get God. But anyone can suggest another language that this is true in as well? So the Tanya tells us that when we understand something, our brain surrounds the concept, and our brain basically grasps onto this concept. Now, it's deeper actually than grasping a physical object, because if I lift an item, once I drop it, it doesn't change me, right? Like either I'm holding it or I'm not holding it. With an intellectual concept, and we spoke about this last time a little bit, once I know something, I can't unknow it. Like it becomes part of me. So once I know something about you, there's a part of me now that's connecting deeper to you. I can't like let it go the same way I let go of a physical object. So let's talk about trying to get God. Is it possible for finite human beings to grasp an infinite God? I mean, that would be the same as, is it possible for a finite human to grasp something with infinite weight? It doesn't matter how big or strong I am. I'm never going to have infinite capacity. I'm not going to be able to lift something that has infinite weight. So here's where the Tanya starts in chapter 5 and says, yes, but there's something unique about godliness that does allow us to grasp godliness more than would be natural. Let's look inside the beginning of chapter 5 and we'll see it inside. I think that Tanya says it very clearly. I highlighted the words here. I'm going to read through the English. This is the very beginning of chapter 5. A further explanation to more fully elucidate the expression tfisa, to grasp. In the words of Elijah, no thought can grasp you. So just a quick note about Elijah. We're all familiar, I think, with Elijah the prophet. Elijah actually was a prophet who lived in biblical times. And then the Torah tells us that Elijah never actually passed away. When his life was over, he transcended into a spiritual realm. And after that, he had a spiritual life. And he keeps making these appearances throughout Jewish history. We're all familiar with the idea that Elijah comes to visit every Passover Seder. Elijah comes to visit every bris of a Jewish child. And at different times in history, there were people who achieved like great stature that actually were able to communicate with or study with Elijah. So there is a quote from Elijah where Elijah says, no one can actually grasp God. God is beyond grasping. So the Tanya now says, when any intellect perceives and understands some intellectual subject, the mind grasps the subject and encompasses it. And the subject is grasped and encompassed by and is clothed within the intellect that understood it and perceived it. Now, this is very interesting. The Tanya is telling us that when I grasp something intellectually, it's actually stronger than a regular grasp, because not only is my mind grasping this idea, but the idea is grasping my mind at the same time. We actually don't have that in any other physical grasp, except probably for a human hug. You know, when I lift something up, I lift it up and I could drop it. The item doesn't lift me back up. Actually, Kabbalah, talking about hugs, Kabbalah says that a hug is very powerful because unlike a smile that's face to face, or a kiss as well that's face to face, a hug, when I hug someone, I'm hugging them, I'm hugging their whole body, meaning I'm also including the back of them. Kabbalistically, it symbolizes the idea that I fully accept and support all of you, even your back, like even your back that's not the significant part of you. It's not the part of you that I communicate with, not the part of you that I maybe fully understand. But the message is, I'm fully here for you. I'm fully getting you and supporting you. And when the second person reciprocates and hugs the first person back, it's very powerful. That's two people basically telling each other, we're fully here for each other. We're fully here to support each other. But this idea doesn't typically happen in any grasping, right? When I lift anything else up, it's just me lifting it up or putting it down. The Tanya says, let's talk about grasping an idea. Yeah, go ahead, Lorraine.
So wait, Deanie, I'm trying to follow this train of thought. When we are studying is when we're grasping God, or when we are doing actions, loving actions and mitzvot, we are grasping God, or when we are praying, we're grasping God, or like, is it all of the above, or is it only the study part that you just started talking about?
I'm so happy that you asked that. So let's clarify. Last chapter, we said that the moment of doing action, I'm able to connect with God in a very, very high way, in a very amazing way. In this chapter, we're actually gonna show that intellectually studying about God has benefits over the action. And then we're kind of going to compare the two and say, well, you know, do I need both? Why do I need both? Because they each have something that the other doesn't have. And ultimately, we really need both in this relationship. Just like in a human relationship, I need to do for the other beyond my understanding of them. At the same time, I also want to work on trying to understand them, because that's a real deep relationship. So
just to make sure I am following you. So action connects you. So doing acts of mitzvot and lighting candles and visiting the sick, all those different things connect you. But studying Torah and Tehillim and whatever, anytime you're studying, you are connecting on a deeper, richer level, trying to understand, not just connect.
exactly, you're actually becoming one with God. And we're going to talk about that in a minute.
So
So
like this course would
Absolutely.
count as that deeper attempt.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
I'm just trying to hang with
Oh,
you.
good. Okay, I appreciate
Sometimes
it.
it's not so easy. I'm trying to hang with you. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So let's just talk about intellect for a minute, intellectual understanding. Like, let's forget anything else. I'm trying to understand the concept. Why is it so powerful to understand an intellectual concept? So the Tanya describes an interesting process. It says the first thing that happens when I'm trying to understand a concept, a new concept comes at me. And I don't get it at first, right? I read it, maybe I couldn't translate it, but when you read a paragraph, you could translate every word, and you're like, well, I don't really get what that's trying to say. Like, I still can't make sense of it. At that moment, you're swimming in this idea, but you haven't really internalized the idea. So you could say that at this time, the concept is grasping me. I'm not really grasping the concept yet. Then as I slowly start to understand the idea, bit by bit, I internalize it, I compartmentalize it, I fit it into my brain in the way that makes sense, slowly but surely, till I fully get the whole idea. And at the end of it, I could say, I got it. Now I have the idea inside of me. It's food. I just ate this idea. It became one with me. It no longer exists outside of me. Now I get the idea. So that's very powerful, because in this, it's not just the final product of understanding the idea at the end, but this whole process of trying to wrap my brain around something is an exercise of this concept and my brain wiggling around until finally it's internalized. Now, of course, that's powerful with any concept. Let's talk about studying godly concepts. Now, of course, a finite mind cannot understand infinity, but God says, guess what? I'm going to give you a gift. I am going to give you something that you can study that is my wisdom. And as soon as you can grasp my wisdom, unlike a human being, that there's me and there are my thoughts and there are my ideas and there are my plans and there's my personality and it's a bunch of separate parts of me, with God, it's all one. So God and his wisdom are one. So if I can even grasp any part of God's wisdom, I'm actually grasping God in my mind at that time. And if you really think about it, you realize it's such a powerful concept. I have the ability to toy with godliness in my mind because I'm trying to grasp a godly idea. And the godly idea is God, because God is indivisible. God and his ideas and his wisdom is all one thing. So when I am sitting and trying to grasp a godly idea, and I'm going through this process of, it's a lot of information, doesn't make sense. Well, let me see. Okay, I got this part of it. Now I got that part of it. Oh, I got it. Now I think I really get it. I just did this dance with godliness itself, and I have just internalized godliness into my mind. And just like food, that's why it's called food for the soul. Once I eat the food, it's part of me forever, right? We have to say a moment on the lips, forever on the hips. I ate it, It's part of me. It will always be part of me. I can't uneat it. Once I absorb knowledge of God inside of me, I literally have more godliness as part of me. My brain is a more godly brain. My mind, my approach to the world is more refined and more godly. And that's you know what it reminds me of when I think of this process. I think of a college student who's trying to put together a thesis. So they have all of these ideas, right? First, they kind of put out all of their ideas of the things that they want to work on, and they're like swimming in ideas and in concepts, but they didn't actually organize it and put it in some kind of systematic, organized way. They're swimming in all these ideas and information, and then slowly they start to organize it, make it systematic. They organize it in their mind until finally they could present to you a full concept that they fully get. But it's not just the final product that was the goal of this project. The goal of the project of writing the thesis is to spend time dabbling in all of these ideas until eventually you're able to internalize it and really make it part of you. Similarly, when the idea of studying Torah, studying godly wisdom, that effort that I'm spending on trying to swim in a concept, overwhelmed by the concept, I grasp it a little bit, I grasp it a little more, I ask questions. That whole back and forth is not just me trying to understand abstract concepts. I'm literally internalizing godliness. I'm going through this process of uniting with godly ideas. Yeah, Barbara, you want to say something? And I saw Harriet wanted to share as well.
So are you saying that it's a transformation of us because it's entering not just our intellect, but our soul? So we're transformed by this
Absolutely.
knowledge and this grasp of God. We're grasping God and God is grasping us, and we're now
100%.
transformed.
100%. And I love that you use that idea of we're being transformed, because that's exactly how I was going to sum it up after. If we're going to compare the power of a mitzvah to the power of understanding godliness, the power of a mitzvah, we said last time, it's garments. I could wear garments to express different parts of me. And it's fine to wear a garment that's way fancier than what I usually wear. I'm expressing that certain part of me. But once I take that uniform off, I'm back to me. So engaging in a mitzvah is amazing and it's so powerful, but it doesn't necessarily transform me on the inside, because I do it when I do it, and when I don't do it, I'm not doing it. When I study, I become transformed. I become a more refined person. I have a more refined outlook on life. I have a more godly outlook on life when I'm studying godly ideas, which is why many times you meet people who spend a lot of time studying Torah and they have a very refined outlook on life. And sometimes these are people we want to consult about other areas of life, not just Judaism, because you see the whole way of looking at life is just so refined and so divine from the amount of time they have spent studying this divinity.
Does it transform your soul, your neshama?
Of course, yes.
That
The
what you-
mind is the seat of the soul. So your soul becomes more refined as it dabbles in and absorbs more godly ideas. And this is back to our parallel of the relationship. You know, am I just doing for the other, or am I trying to understand them? A relationship that has only one without the other is incomplete. You know, if all I'm doing is sitting and saying, oh, so tell me what you like and tell me and explain to me, but that I don't actually do anything for the other, that's not either a great relationship, right? But if I'm constantly doing for the other and I never take the time to look them in the eye and say, explain to me, why is that important to you? Like, I really want to know. I want to understand you. That's the deeper, intimate connection in the relationship. And a good relationship needs both. And with our godly relationship, we want both as well. We don't want to be stuck in like, I'm only going to do what I understand. I want to do beyond what I understand, just like I would for someone whom I love. At the same time, I don't want it to be just about action. I want to infuse it with, let me understand you a little more. Let me get you more. I want to understand how your brain works. And that's the part of the relationship that we express through studying God's wisdom, which is the Torah. Harriet, I think you wanted to say something before we go to Arlene.
Yeah, actually I have two things. And one was really along the lines of what Barbara was talking about in terms of being both the object and the subject of the transformation, that it's this synergy of, as we grasp the ideas, as we're transformed by the ideas, that then we become able to carry that into other relationships. And it's you know, by our learning by our studying, learning the concepts and being transformed by them, then we then take that and are able to take that godliness into other relationships and impact those around us. But the other piece, when we talk about there's not, we talk about studying Torah and doing mitzvot, but isn't studying Torah part of isn't that a mitzvah? I mean, it's like we have this, we do this or we do this, but studying Torah is part of doing mitzvah.
So that's so great that you brought that up. The end of the chapter actually says that the ultimate way to do this, if you kind of want to catch both at once, is to verbally study Torah, because the mitzvah of studying Torah is, even if I am just reading Torah thoughts without understanding them, I'm still doing the mitzvah part of studying Torah, but I'm not getting that deep intellectual connection. So the conclusion of the chapter says, so if you study Torah and you study out loud, you get the best of both worlds, because you're working on the intellectual comprehension and you're also verbalizing it. So boom, you're doing your Torah and your mitzvah together. Arlene, what did you want to say?
It was really a question, and I don't know, I might just not being able to comprehend it, but when you say we need to grasp and conceptualize and intellectually understand, I need an example.
Okay, good. That's my next thing. Have an example.
Yeah, because, okay, you do the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles because we're supposed to. From whence do you grasp the concept of what God's wanting us to do that for, kind of thing? That was just one example, but it's just really hard for me to get it into my head how we intellectualize all this.
Okay, so I think there's a few different things here. Firstly, if you could study about every particular mitzvah, you could study about Shabbos candles, what the background is, why we do it, especially if you delve into the Hasidic explanation, Kabbalistic explanation, you'll get a lot of deeper layers of understanding, so you can appreciate the mitzvah so much more. Specifically this chapter, when it's talking about studying Torah, it actually tells us that's not necessarily just studying those bits of Torah that I find inspiration from. Anytime I study any part of Torah, in that moment, I am entering this deep divine union with godliness. And the example that Tanya uses, it says, even if I just study a random law in the Talmud. So I'm actually wondering if we should do the example first, or we should explain it first. But let's do the example first. Let's try this out. Let's pull out a random law in the Talmud. Let's spend some time trying to understand it and grapple with it and kind of see what happens. So I copied here. I have it's a translation, a very basic, simple translation of a little section of Talmud. Let's read it out loud and see how much sense it makes to us. This is what the statement in the Talmud says. We testify that so-and-so owes his friend 1,000 zuz with an undertaking to repay it within 30 days. But he says within 10 years. The assessment is made on the basis of how much one would be willing to offer for holding the sum of 1,000 zuz, whether they are given for 30 days or 10 years. If it made sense to you, if you want to explain to us what we're talking about, go ahead. I think for most people, especially those who don't study Talmud on a regular basis, they're like, what in the world, right? I can read and translate every word here, except maybe zuz is unfamiliar, but everything else, I can translate it, but I definitely don't get it. So at this point, this idea is surrounding my mind. My mind is not grasping this idea. So I'm going to give you some background that if you were actually studying this in the Talmud, the commentaries would fill in some of these background pieces so that you can better understand it. This statement in the Talmud happens, there's assumed knowledge in the Talmud, a lot of assumed knowledge that you kind of know based on background information, based on previous study. The assumed knowledge here is that you understand that this is talking about a court case. It's a court of law, and there are two witnesses who are testifying. Now, the two witnesses are testifying about a particular person, and they say, this guy owes his friend 1,000 zuz. Zuz is a kind of currency. This person owes his friend 1,000 zuz and said he's going to repay it within 30 days. And so then the judges turn to the guy who's being accused, and they say, what do you say? He says, I admit, I owe him 1,000 zuz. The only thing they're saying incorrectly is that I never said I'm going to repay it in 30 days. I said I'm going to repay it within 10 years. So the court case goes on, the witnesses are interrogated, and it turns out the witnesses are actually lying. They turn out to be false witnesses. And so the Talmud's trying to understand what would be the punishment of these witnesses. Now, in Judaism, in Jewish law, if somebody testifies falsely against somebody else, the punishment that they receive is whatever it is they were trying to inflict on the other person. Meaning, if two witnesses come and say, Jack killed someone, the punishment for killing in Torah is death penalty. So these witnesses were trying to inflict the death penalty upon Jack. It turns out that the witnesses were lying, and so the witnesses would then be punished with death penalty. It kind of seems, logical. Like they were trying to get someone to suffer a punishment that they didn't deserve. Well, they will ultimately get that same punishment to really make people take testifying in court seriously. If you're going to testify against someone, it's because you really have seen it and you really know it to be true. So in this case, the Talmud's trying to figure out what would be the punishment for these false witnesses. They came and they said that this guy is supposed to pay the 1,000 zuz within a month, when really he only said he was going to pay it within 10 years. What do you think their consequence should be? I can't hear you, Lorraine. You're suggesting something.
They would be the ones that would owe the court that money. They would have to pay back that money.
Okay, so this is interesting, because if you read carefully, the guy didn't deny that he owes the money. He definitely said, I owe the money. The only difference is, do I owe the money in 30 days or do I owe it in 10 years?
So they would have to pay it in the 30 days, and he'd have 10 years to pay them back.
Okay, so close enough. So basically what the conclusion of the Talmud here is that you have to figure out the difference between a 30-day loan of 1,000 zuz and a 10-year loan of 1,000 zuz. So you have to figure out how much would someone be willing to pay to extend a loan of 1,000 zuz that's only existent for 30 days, how much it would be worth it for them to extend it for 10 years, because clearly a 10-year loan is worth much more. And that difference is how much these witnesses have to pay. So, kind of similar to what you said, the difference between the value of a 30-day loan versus a 10-year loan. Now, now let's just read it again one more time. So now it kind of makes sense to us. So a law in the Talmud, the two witnesses say, we testify that so-and-so owes his friend 1,000 zuz with an undertaking to repay it within 30 days. And the person says, yes, I did take a loan for 1,000 zuz, but I said I'm going to repay it within 10 years. How the witnesses are lying. How do we decide what their punishment is? The assessment is made on the basis of how much someone would be willing to offer for holding the sum of 1,000 zuz, the difference between holding it for 30 days versus holding it for 10 years. Okay, this was a random law in the Talmud. Theoretical. It potentially never could have happened. Meaning, sorry, not could, it could have happened. But there's a strong possibility that it never happened. It's just hypothetical. Now, honestly, most people studying this are not necessarily judges or lawyers. Why bother studying this kind of law anyway? So this is where Judaism is interesting. They don't call us the people of the book for no reason. They call us the people of the book because in other religions they have study, they have things that they study, but it's usually, it's not very deep study. It's on a need to know basis. You study what you need to know, you memorize the quotes that you need to memorize to explain whatever it is that you're doing. What Jews have always been known to do is to delve into these concepts, even though most Jews were not litigators. Like in the secular world, who studies law? Someone who's going to law school, someone who's interested in law, looking to become a lawyer, a judge, someone who's in politics, perhaps. But the average person is not studying the law. Why is it that in Judaism we spend so much time studying laws? So I would say two things. Firstly, the more I study a Torah concept, the more I'm able to get into the headspace. Like I'm able to wear God goggles. The more I'm able to view various scenarios and say, oh, what's God's opinion in this situation? I'm able to refine my outlook on the world and start seeing things from that godly perspective. But on a deeper level, just studying and delving into a Torah concept, studying this, even if it never happened and it never will happen, and I will never sit in a court of law and I will never be involved in anything like this, spending time to understand this concept and understanding the Torah's view in this concept is my brain marinating in godliness, uniting with godly wisdom, which is God himself. And I already know what the next question is. The next question is, Dini, that's Torah, but this is just a law in the Bible, in the Talmud. How is a law in the Talmud Torah? Raise your hand if you had that question, because I know it came up last time and I wanted to spend some time answering it. There is a very big misconception that I hear a lot from people, which I think comes from really lack of understanding, where the Talmud is often presented, the Talmud and the Mishnah and other rabbinic literature, so to speak, is presented as a collection of writings of a bunch of rabbis. I think it's important to take some time to understand what is the source for something like the Talmud, where it comes from, and why it would be considered Torah more than, I don't know, anything else that someone else decides to write. Like we actually ask students, what makes something Torah? Could something be written in 2024 and be part of Torah? And if yes, what constitutes Torah? Like a Jewish author? So every novel ever written by, name some Jewish author who writes random novels, like, does that become Torah because they're a Jewish person? Clearly there has to be something more to that. So I want to take some time just to clarify how Torah defines what Torah is, and then we can go back to understanding why something like this is considered a part of Torah. So just give me a second. I have a little slide. I'm hoping that it could really be a class on its own, but I'm hoping to give a general overview. When we say Torah, we start with Moses. We say Moses was on Mount Sinai. After the Jews received the 10 Commandments, Moses went up to the top of the mountain. He stayed there for 40 days. He studied the whole Torah with God. And then he came down and he taught for the next 40 years in the desert. He taught the Torah to the Jewish people. What exactly did he teach them? They weren't sitting with a Bible, with a Chumash, with a Torah scroll studying. What was Moshe teaching them? The truth is that what Moshe taught them was all oral. It was not written. He went through all the commandments and he said, these are the commandments, and this is what a mezuzah is, and this is what tefillin is, this is how Shabbat is done, this is how Shabbat is not done, these are the laws of kosher, and these are the details of the laws of kosher. And going through every single mitzvah and every single part of Torah, he taught it all orally, and there are actually beautiful descriptions that tell us how he taught it orally and what a big emphasis was put on this oral transmission, meaning he couldn't just give it over and assume they knew it. Moshe would teach it one time, and he had his closest students next to him. Then he would step back, and his student, Yehoshua, Joshua, would repeat what Moshe just said. And Moshe would listen to make sure he's saying it correctly. So now all the people heard it a second time. And then Joshua would step back, and the elders would come forward, and they would now repeat for the third time what Moshe had just said. And there was this whole process until finally it reached a point where the people themselves started reviewing what their teachers had said, and they would review it in front of their teachers. Their teachers were able to correct them in case they said it incorrectly. For 40 years in the desert, this is how Jews were studying Torah. Moshe was giving them everything orally. Now, there were people who kept notes. There were always people who kept notes, but there was no formal documentation of this Torah. When they got at the end of Moshe's life, that's when he wrote the book, the first 5 books. It says Moshe completed it right before he passed away. We just read it at the end of the Torah. That book could kind of be compared to the notes or the cliff notes of everything he taught them. Because if you actually open a Torah scroll, you cannot begin to understand almost any of the commandments. If you open up a Torah scroll, I mean, we read in the Shema, it says, you should write it on your doorposts. And that's all it says. How in the world did the Jews figure out from, and you should write it on your doorposts, that we're supposed to put up mezuzah, and the mezuzah should say the Shema, and it should be on a parchment that's rolled up, and it should be on the right side of the doorpost? How are they supposed to know that? They're not just supposed to take a marker and write all over the doorposts and draw stars of David all over their doorposts. It doesn't say that in the Torah. But for the Jews who studied Torah with Moshe for so many years, when they read it in the written text, as abbreviated as it is, they're like, oh, that's what he meant when he told us about the mezuzah. And then they keep reading, and it says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's all the Torah says about kosher. It doesn't give us all the details of exactly how to do kosher. But to the Jews at that time, it was so obvious. We've just spent 40 years studying these laws. This is what it's referring to. Now, for the next few hundred years, I would really say for about the next 2,000 years, this is how Torah was transmitted. There was always the written Torah, which, then the prophets added to until it was sealed at 24 books. So there's the actual written Bible, so to speak. That's the written Torah. Most of the Torah that the Jews studied was studied orally, parent to child, teacher to student, reviewed and reviewed and reviewed hundreds of times. Now, remember, there's no printing press, even if they wanted to write it down, right? It was all transmitted orally. You can ask, why would something so important be transmitted orally? I mean, think about it. The Torah is meant to be a living book and a living guide. If all of Torah had been just written in books on people's shelves, it would be collecting dust for a lot of people. One of the ways to keep it alive is something that was constantly studied. And Jews were always known to study, and they made their kids learn to read and learn to study, because if you didn't keep it going to the next generation, it was just going to get lost. So for 2,000 years, approximately, the Jews are studying and transmitting this Torah orally. Now, I want to add a detail you see here on my chart. The oral Torah consists really of 2 parts. There's what was taught by Moses during his lifetime. There's also something called laws of derivation that Moshe gave to the Jewish people, where he said, look, I taught you as much as I could teach you in 40 years. You will come to new situations, that I didn't cover. How are you supposed to know what to do in those situations? He laid out for them 13 principles about how Torah can be derived, how you can take one concept in Torah and apply it to a new situation. If it compares this way, if it compares that way, this is a valid way of applying it. This is an invalid way of applying it. It's a very detailed set of laws of how Torah can be further applied and derived. Once he gave all of this over to them, this all became part of the oral Torah. So what happened over the 2,000 years is you have not just all the Torah that Moshe taught for 40 years in the desert, not just the laws of derivation, but then you have transmission of rulings. So for example, if, 10 years after Moshe passed away, a situation came up and the Jewish leaders had to decide what to do. They used the laws of derivation to understand what the ruling should be. And once the ruling was decided, that became part of the continued oral tradition. If I want to compare it to something in the secular world, I think the closest comparison we have is the US Constitution. We say in Hebrew, lahavdil. We don't, we're comparing something holy to something unholy. But, we have in the Constitution, we have situations where a lawyer or a judge doesn't always have to come up with the law from scratch. They're able to say, well, in 1901, there was a similar situation and the Supreme Court ruled X, and that was the accepted ruling. So based on that, that should be able to be applied now as well, right? We're all familiar with that. So in Torah law, we have the same thing. Once something was decided and ruled, it set a certain precedent. And so that was something that was then transmitted as part of the oral law. I also want to say that studying Torah orally, teacher to student, parent to child, is so much more meaningful and richer than just studying it out of a book. Like we could understand the benefit and the beauty of Jews always studying Torah orally. It was always something that was discussed, and there was, there were facial expressions and there were examples, and it was something that was very much alive. About 2,000 years ago, so it was approximately around the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the Jews were facing a very big dilemma. For the first time in our entire history, the Jews were about to be spread out and no longer all living in Israel. This idea of transmitting a tradition orally is so beautiful and so rich. It could only really continue to happen as long as all Jews are living in one place with a similar lifestyle and they're able to keep this going. At that time, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince. He really was the one who made this big decision that we have to start documenting this oral law. We've been transmitting oral Torah for 2,000 years, but I see the situation of the Jewish people now, and this is not going to last very long. As soon as our temple is destroyed, we're going to be scattered. There's going to be Jews living all over the world, and it's going to be impossible to continue this oral tradition. So although the oral tradition is ideal and it's amazing, we have to start writing things down. And so he sat down together with a bunch of scholars at the time, and they put together the Mishnah. The Mishnah is not a bunch of things that they made up. The Mishnah is a collection of teachings that the Jews had been passing down orally for 2,000 years. Now, they wrote it down very briefly in very short, not very elaborately, because at the time, anyone who was studying it had references and background, like, oh yeah, I remember studying that. They didn't have to write that many details. A few generations later, that wasn't enough anymore, because now we're a little further removed and the Jews needed more clarification. That's when the Talmud came about. The whole Talmud is a bunch of scholars sitting down with the Mishnah, trying to understand the Mishnah. And the only way they can understand the Mishnah is based on what was recorded in the Mishnah, based on what they may have had as personal notes from previous generations, and based on their collective knowledge that they all had been passing down for all of these years. And that continued and continues until today. Today, you can write a book of Torah today. You take any book that is clearly has roots in the written Torah or the oral tradition, and using laws of derivation and using knowledge that you have received from someone who's been studying Torah all these years, you can write a new book about I don't know, organizing my desk the Jewish way. And so I'm just looking at my messy desk while I'm speaking. If I write a book like that and the sources that I'm using are all sourced in Torah, that was either the written Torah or the oral tradition, and I'm able to really show how everything I'm saying comes from this source, my book is part of Torah as well. So I know this was a long deviation, but what I'm trying to get to is when we read this law in the Talmud, it's not a bunch of rabbis sitting down and saying, what should the law be if this and this happens? They're writing down a law that has been passed down for generations, dating back to Moses. So that example that we read about two witnesses lying in court and what the ultimate ruling is Torah, is actual Torah. And that is divine will. And by studying this law, even if it never happened and never will happen, even if I'm never going to sit in a court of law and I'm never going to have to decide this, just me trying to grasp this and understand it, I am grasping and understanding godliness. And that's equivalent to me looking my partner in the eye and saying, tell me again, what do you think of this? And why is this important to you? That's the equivalent of that intimate, deep connection with godliness, even in topics that aren't necessarily inspiring me at this moment. Yes, Harriet.
Two things. When we study Torah at the level in terms of grasping, I mean, I'm thinking of my finite self sitting there reading word for word. Our soul is connecting with God. I mean, it seems to me that's what we're talking about, is that's what the experience is that connection with God, not my physical, here I am in this physical body. Is that, I mean.
So they're both true, meaning you sitting down to say, I'm going to study Torah now. I am a physical human. I'm going to spend some time, I'm going to open a book, whether I understand it or not. I'm spending time. I want to study Torah, whatever part of Torah you choose to study. That's the mitzvah of studying Torah. At this moment, you are putting on godly garments. This is what we discussed in chapter 4, and it's amazing. You are hugging God. At the same time, if you want the benefit of that deep, intimate connection with God, that would come through not just the action of studying Torah, but the mental toil of studying Torah. Sitting and really trying to understand a concept, spending time grappling with it, asking questions, kind of like what we did with that law. 1 second, what's the background? Where does this come from? Does this make sense? How does this fit in with something else that I know? Sitting now and discussing the concepts or meditating or thinking about the concepts, that gives you the benefit of the study of Torah, not just the mitzvah of engaging in Torah.
But there's a transcendent quality, it seems to me, in terms of that synchronicity of grasping and being grasped by it, that transcends the physical. Or maybe that's just how I have to.
That's a benefit that we only get with the intellectual part of Torah study. The reason why for generations Jews have sat and studied Torah law, and you think why are there thousands of people just sitting and studying these things? I mean, they're not all going to be rabbis. They're not all going to have to, decide on these things. And it could be any part of Torah, because there's a benefit to just studying Torah, seeping your mind in godly knowledge. Arlene.
So the example that we just had, reading the issue, delving into it, seeing what the Torah came up with as a logical conclusion, how does that enable us to see what God's intention is? I mean, by just that example, do we then say, oh, well, God wanted the justice. He wanted the tit for tat. I guess that's what you study it, and okay, I can understand the logic behind the decision. It made sense, but how does that help me grasp God?
Okay. So you're asking a great question. I think also we have to break it down into a few parts. When I'm looking for an inspiration for a particular part of Judaism that I'm working on, so studying a random law in Torah won't necessarily give me that inspiration, right? I want to understand kosher. Like I need to be inspired to care more about kosher. I'm going to spend time studying more about the background of kosher and where it comes from to give myself that inspiration. That's one type of study, which is great. What we're focusing on now is any type of Torah study. Understanding that anytime I engage in Torah study, whether it's practical or not practical, whether I find it inspiring and enlightening or I don't, there's a tremendous benefit to that. And the benefit to that is two parts. Number one, the more I spend time in that, the more godly like my brain is going to think. So maybe here I read one thing and I didn't feel that it affected me, but if I spend a lot of time studying about all different types of cases and what the Torah's approach is to many types of cases, yeah, I'm going to start being more sensitive to things and start saying, oh, okay, the Jewish perspective is always, the compassionate one. And the Jewish perspective, like it starts giving me a better feel for what God's perspective on life is.
Mhm.
That's one part. And the other part is, even if I never get anything from it, I'm just sitting and studying, I'm not wasting my time. I'm actually engaging in an incredible pursuit of uniting my mind with godliness. And that alone is worth a tremendous amount. So, again, I think we could all find parts of Torah that we want to study, that we do study, and I think we should find the parts that enlighten us and inspire us, and we should focus on those parts. At the same time, we should also know that anytime I engage in Torah study, I'm doing something amazing. I actually wanted to say, I was going to say this after my summary, but for anyone who needs to go, if I would say the one takeaway from this chapter is, sometime this week, you're going to study something from Torah, whether it's something you read online or it's something that someone shares with you. If you just take a minute to be intentional right before you study it and say, I'm about to engage in the godly pursuit of uniting my mind with godliness, and then study it. You'll understand it the same way, but you'll get a much deeper appreciation for what you're actually doing. You're actually literally uniting your mind with God at that moment. I want to give a quick summary just so that we know what we're up to. We're speaking about the benefit of doing a mitzvah and the benefit of studying Torah. So engaging in a mitzvah is very powerful because action is the main thing, and just get it done. And engaging in action, especially when I don't understand it, allows me to transcend myself, right? It's not like when I tell my spouse, I'm only going to do it if it makes sense to me and if you explain it to me. But if I do it, even when I don't, or especially when I don't understand it, it's saying, I'm doing anything for you. I am in this relationship. I'm going to do what you want. That's the benefit of a mitzvah. The limitation of a mitzvah is, like Barbara said, it is external. It lasts as long as it lasts. And when the mitzvah is over, I took off that uniform and now I'm back to being me. So it doesn't actually transform me from the inside. It allows me to, put on superpowers and surpass my physical limitations, but I haven't been changed as a person. On the flip side, Torah study changes me from the inside. It refines my mind. It refines my soul. It allows me to connect with God in a very deep, intimate, internal way. And that's what the Tanya calls food for the soul. Just like I wouldn't go a day without eating, I shouldn't let too much time pass without just giving myself inspiration. And you could kill two birds with one stone. Study the parts of Torah that you find inspiring. Study the parts of Torah that explain the parts that you're struggling with. So you actually will feel the inspiration as well. And like Lorraine said earlier, you can only keep going so far without inspiration. The more you feed your soul, the more you get inspired, the more you can also engage in the action. They're not dependent on each other. I don't tell my husband, I'm only going to do it once you explain it to me. Of course I'm going to do it. That's what you want. But now also explain it to me. I also want to understand you better. And those are two parts of this relationship that are both so important. And we engage in both as part of our relationship with a living God. As part of a living relationship with a living God, we engage in both parts. We don't wait to fully understand until we do, but we also don't ignore the understanding. We want to make sure we're constantly trying to understand, so we're always inspired and deeply connected and want to grow and want to do more. Thoughts, questions, you're welcome to stay on. Anyone who has to go, have a good night. We'll see you next time. And chapter 5 really concludes a discussion about the godly soul, the initial discussion. Chapter 6, we start talking more about the animalistic soul and understanding the more natural part of us, so we can better compare the two. Anyone else with thoughts, questions? Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Yeah, Barbara, you want to say something?
Is studying, oh, am
Yeah,
I
go
on? Is studying Musar the same as studying Torah?
Musar is definitely part of Torah. Yes. I will say that 100%, you're studying Torah when you're studying Musar. Now, the limitation of Musar is that typically it has a little bit of a negative tone to it. So it's not everyone finds it very inspiring and compelling to move forward. If you find it inspiring, if you feel that it's helping you grow in your relationship with God, then go ahead, study Musar.
And let me ask you one other thing.
Yeah.
Why don't all Jews study Tanya?
I think that today all Jews study Tanya. I think that, there was a time when the Tanya was first introduced, there were those who were worried about the Tanya being introduced because the Tanya exposes a lot of Kabbalah and Kabbalistic teachings.
Mhm.
And Kabbalistic teachings were always limited to a small minority of elite people. So people who were very worried about what's going to happen when this very precious part of Judaism just becomes free for everyone to study. But I think it's pretty safe to say today that it's kind of seeped into all Jewish communities, and there's no one today that is opposed to the study of Tanya at all. I think it's been published in, I don't even remember how many languages. The Tanya is very, very, very broadly studied today.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
That was a great class. I'm surprised to see you, but I'm glad you're here.
I might just be here for another 2 weeks. You never know.
And be
And
well.
Eileen, it was so great to see you. You look amazing. She just had